Well, it looks like Israel is already heading toward a pullout from phase 2. They're claiming Hamas hasn't upheld its end of the deal, specifically by not returning the bodies that they knew they were likely not going to receive, all of them at the same time. There's a wave of propaganda that has been posted online, really to stir up public support for finishing the job. Stories of Hamas executions, alleged abuse of the bodies, Palestinians being painted as rapists and terrorists. Meanwhile, Israel has restricted aid going into the Strip. They might have resumed it at this point. We'll get into that, but there have been some reports of them restricting the aid as well as renewed strikes on Palestinians. They have killed Palestinians in these recent days since the ceasefire. What is this all about? Let's go ahead and take a look at this. So this is, first of all, here's from the Times of Israel. Israel won't reopen the Rafah crossing, will limit aid to pressure Hamas for remaining slain hostages. As IDs confirmed 4 hostages remains, families of captives still in Gaza demand deal be put on hold until their loved ones return, accuse government of shirking immediate duty. The latest reports are, I believe, that they've returned 8 of the bodies. But it says Israel on Tuesday decided not to reopen the Rafah border crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt the next day as required by the ceasefire deal. So whenever you hear the propaganda that it's Hamas that doesn't live up to their end of the bargain, just remember it's Israel that really is the ones that don't actually live up to their end of the bargain. And they use excuses. They make excuses. They say, well, no, Hamas didn't return the bodies. Well, Donald Trump even said it was going to take a while, and some of them it would be impossible. And Red Cross is on the ground helping out. Let me just slow down and let's go through this one by one. So Israel said it would also reduce the amount of aid flowing into Gaza as part of the sanctions against the terror group. So they're saying they're going to sanction them because they're not living up to their end of the deal. The move follows assessments by Israel defense officials that Hamas has not made significant efforts to return the remaining bodies of the hostages, and amid rising anger among their families, with the main group representing them demanding that the ceasefire agreement's implementation be halted until their loved ones are returned. All of the living hostages were returned. So they're talking about bodies that are buried under the rubble. But they're trying to say that they're not getting them fast enough. There were 28 bodies in total that they were supposed to be receiving. At the time of the writing of this article from Times of Israel, they had received 4 of the bodies. I believe they've since received 8 of the bodies. But, this is Trump even admitted this was going to be difficult. It was going to be difficult to find all of the bodies.
Yeah, please.
What will happen if Hamas says that it cannot locate or was not able to find all of the deceased hostages' bodies within the time frame?
Well, we'll have to see. I think that's going to be, it's largely been answered. We know where most of them are. Actually, the bodies are a bigger problem because some of the bodies are going to be a little bit hard to find. It's a terrible thing to discuss even, but you understand, we're all people, we're grown-ups, we understand life. Nobody can understand this stuff because this could have taken place, but we have the hostages for the most part, and so I don't think it's going to be overly big. The situation with the bodies, they say 20, 28, some are going to be a little bit hard to find, but we're going to do the best we can. Yeah, please.
If they don't find them with.
I didn't think it could happen to me, but just recently someone stole my information and actually bought a car under my name in Texas. While I was standing in the Idaho DMV getting my new driver's license, a thief was driving off the dealer lot pretending to be me. And I only caught it because I was getting bombarded with alerts. Now imagine if I hadn't seen them in time. And this is exactly why today's sponsor, Aura, matters. If you've ever wondered how scammers get your personal info, your phone number, your address, even where you supposedly work, it's because of data brokers. These shady companies collect your data and sell it to anyone, from marketers to scammers, and they make billions doing it. They don't ask your permission. And while they're legally required to remove your info if you ask, they make the process nearly impossible on purpose. Believe me, I'm going through it right now. But if I had Aura set up before, this thief would have had a much harder time. Aura automatically scans and scrubs your information from those data broker sites, and then it keeps it off. It also gives you real-time fraud alerts, so instead of finding out a day later that someone used your name, you get notified right away. That's the kind of tool I wish I had in place when all of this happened. But Aura is more than just removing your data from shady brokers. It's an all-in-one digital security app. It alerts you if your personal info is found on the dark web. It monitors your credit and bank accounts in real time. It gives you a secure VPN, password manager, antivirus, and more. And if something does happen, Aura covers you with up to $5 million in identity theft insurance and 24/7 US-based fraud support. The fact that companies profit off of our stolen data while we're left vulnerable is outrageous. I learned that the hard way. But I'm not leaving myself unprotected anymore, and you shouldn't either. Protect yourself and your family with Aura. Try it free for 14 days at aura.com/Kim Iverson. And in just 2 weeks, Aura will show you where your personal data is being exposed and start scrubbing it off the internet automatically. Again, that's aura.com/Kim Iverson. Okay, so they knew this going into the deal. When Trump said that was October 9th, that was the day of the ceasefire agreement. So he said some of the bodies are going to be really hard to find. They knew this, and yet Israel is using it as an excuse to halt aid. They went from 600 trucks a day entering into Gaza to 300. They cut it in half. And then they say, this is a violation of the ceasefire agreement, that we're not getting the bodies back fast enough. When Trump even said, so this is just an excuse. That's all this is. This is one of those excuses. Netanyahu still has not declared an end to the war. And it was because he knew he could use excuses in order to restart the war. But look at this. How are we supposed to find bodies under the rubble like this? Gaza is buried in rubble. They've got thousands of Palestinians buried under the rubble that they haven't been able to recover, let alone Israeli hostages. How are they supposed to find the bodies? But nonetheless, they're trying. The Red Cross is helping them. They're trying to get the bodies back. And this is what Israel. It turns out one of the bodies wasn't correct, so this was again used as an excuse to to basically violate the ceasefire agreement. Here's from the IDF saying, following the completion of examinations at the National Institute of Forensic Medicine, the fourth body handed over to Israel by Hamas does not match any of the hostages. Hamas is required to make all necessary efforts to return the deceased hostages. I have no doubt that they're trying. I don't think they want to keep these bodies. For what reason would they want to keep the bodies? They're trying to get them back. But again, how do you do that when it's looking like this in Gaza? How do you do that? Practically impossible. But nonetheless, here's NPR reporting that Israel is keeping the Gaza border closed while reducing aid deliveries. So they went from 600 trucks down to 300 trucks, saying that they're upset because of the delays in the handover of the bodies of dead hostages by the militant group Hamas, according to NPR. But this is the reality. But some of the news organizations, this is France 24 English, reporting on some of the difficulties Hamas and the Red Cross and the Red Crescent are having trying to locate the bodies.
The Israelis accuse Hamas of acting slower than agreed in returning the remains. With Gaza lying in mostly rubble and littered with unexploded ordnance, locating and identifying the remains is a big challenge. The International Red Cross, which is helping in the search operation, says it could take days or weeks, and that there is a possibility they'd never be found.
I think that there is clearly a risk that will take much more time. What are we telling to the parties is that should be their top priorities. And again, not only when it comes to the human remains of hostages, but other human remains.
Hamas also told mediators that some of the remains are in areas controlled by Israeli troops. Israel had threatened to halve the amount of humanitarian aid into Gaza if the militant group did not act quicker. But in the early hours of Wednesday morning, reversed course. Israeli forces are opening the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt to allow aid to enter as planned.
Okay, so at least they did reverse course on that after threatening and saying we're going to keep the Rafah border closed, the Rafah crossing closed, and we're not going to allow half of the aid in that we originally agreed to. They did have to change their minds on that. Why is that? Probably got a lot of pressure from the Trump administration saying, no, guys, you have to follow through with the deal. And we told you it was going to be difficult to find those bodies because guess what? You dropped like 10 times worth of nuclear bombs on the Gaza Strip. It was like 10 Hiroshima's worth of bombs that were used on the Gaza Strip during this war, during this genocide, this onslaught. I wouldn't even call it a war. One of the negotiators, an Israeli hostage negotiator, Gershon Baskin, said some of the Israeli hostages are impossible to find due to being buried under the rubble. Let's watch that. Here he is.
We spoke to Israeli hostage negotiator Gershon Baskin, who told us that the reality is some bodies sadly may never be recovered.
Somewhere in this landscape of ruin and loss are the bodies of the remaining hostages.
There are two things that we have to be aware of. Many of the Hamas commanders who were responsible for burying these Israeli hostages are no longer alive. They were killed by the Israelis. And the second thing is that there are thousands of Gazans who are unaccounted for, who are believed to be buried underneath the rubble of buildings that Israel bombed.
Okay. So what you have is two things going on, according to the reports. One is some of the bodies are actually wherever the Israelis are still controlling 55% of the Strip. So some of the bodies might be in the areas they're controlling, and they're trying to blame Hamas. Now remember, once again, let me repeat that. Israel is controlling 55% right now of the Gaza Strip. They hold the majority of it. So if the hostages' bodies are in their half, then they need to attempt to locate those bodies. It's not on Hamas. Hamas is not allowed to be there. But nonetheless, Israel uses it as an excuse. Doesn't matter that they're in control of 55%. Another thing is Gershon saying, look, I mean, a lot of these commanders are dead. I mean, the commanders that would know where these bodies were buried, they're now dead. A lot of the people are dead. I mean, you got them, Israel. You won. Remember, that's what you wanted. You wanted to kill them. You killed them. There you go. You win. But guess what? That was the only guy that knew where the last body was buried. And now people are scrambling looking for this, but the people who knew are dead. So you've got multiple problems going on there. But what is Israel? Israel is not reasonable. They're not reasonable at all. And they're just looking for excuses to continue their war. Here is The Intercept actually reporting that Israel look at these mounting ceasefire violations, saying the Israeli government broke the terms of the ceasefire deal on Tuesday, killing at least 7 Palestinians, many of whom were returning to their homes after months of displacement, and announcing it would restrict the amount of humanitarian aid into Gaza. So we saw them reverse the humanitarian aid issue, right? They said they were going to go from 600 trucks to 300 trucks. They ultimately reversed that, but they're still killing Palestinians. This report is saying 7 Palestinians. I've seen other reports saying that it's upward of 30 or 60 Palestinians that have been killed over the last few days. The agreement stipulated that Israel would halt all of its military operations and that the flow of aid would return to levels seen under the previous ceasefire, during which at least 600 aid trucks entered the territory each day. Despite this, Israel's military carried out 2 strikes, and Kogat, the military unit that controls shipments of aid into Gaza, told aid groups that it would limit deliveries to half the amount, 300 trucks daily, agreed upon in the deal. The Israeli government said it would not reopen the Rafah crossing along the border of Egypt, a key avenue for the delivery of aid. Now remember, Hamas is not saying we're not returning the bodies to you. They gave everybody that's alive back. And they're not saying we're not returning the bodies to you. They're just not doing it fast enough, according to the Israelis. It's only been, how many days? 6 days. And they want them to locate the 28 bodies buried under the rubble. Again, after many of the Hamas commanders have been killed, who would maybe know where the bodies are buried. Again, even though Israel controls 55% of the Strip. I mean, this is all just nonsense. And this is the point. The point is this is nonsense meant to carry out the continued genocide, the plan to take all the land and clear it of Palestinians. Israel carried out the attacks and restricted aid as it accused Hamas of failing to hand over the bodies of the remaining Israeli prisoners in a timely manner as promised in the ceasefire agreement. Within the 72 hours allotted in the deal, Hamas returned the 20 living Israeli prisoners in exchange for about 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, many of whom were detained in Gaza during the war without charges. Hamas has returned the bodies of 8 individuals, according to the Red Cross, and the Israeli government, while the Israeli government is admitting that too, that they've returned 8, while the search for 20 others continue. On Tuesday, an Israeli drone strike killed at least 6 people who were inspecting their homes in a residential area of Gaza City. A separate Israeli drone strike killed another individual in the territory outside of Khan Yunis. According to Middle East Eye, and again on Monday, Israeli soldiers killed a man identified by state-sponsored news outlet Wafa as Khalid Barbak while he inspected his home in the downtown area of Khan Yunis. So they're just killing people. This isn't like a one-off, oops, accident. Sorry about that. It just we were testing things, and one kind of fired off on it, had a mind of its own. I mean, any excuse whatsoever, but instead, there is no excuse for this. They're still just killing people. So Israel is absolutely violating the ceasefire agreement. Hamas is living up to its end of the ceasefire agreement. Israel is not. It's pretty simple at this point. Let's see what we have here. Let me show you this. So this is a man named Ali al-Sayez. Was one of the Palestinian prisoners that was released. And the reports that are coming out, what people are claiming, this has been circulating on social media. And this is just what I'm trying to show you here is how there's a narrative being built to try to get people to support more war. They want the war to continue, and they want us to try and, they want us to support it. So they're saying here, in 2003, Palestinian terrorist Ali al-Sayez carried out 10 bombings, including the school bus attack that murdered 7 Israeli children. After 20 years in prison, he's now free, greeted as a hero, and even called a hostage by Arab media. He is reunited with his daughter, who was the same age as the children he slaughtered. These are the heroes celebrated in Gaza. That's the moral disease we're fighting. This was put out by Mossad Commentary. So, what are they? So first of all, that's not true. So verified that this guy there was no Palestinian bombing of a school bus in 2003, first of all. And Ali al-Sayez, there is no record anyone could find, verifiable record of him having committed any sort of terrorist act that killed anybody, what sent him off to prison for 20 years. That being said, there are prisoners, and this is strategic on Israel's part, there are prisoners who've been released in that initial 250. There were a lot of hostages, who I would call Palestinian hostages, who were released, people that were never charged with any crimes as part of the 2000. Many of them never were charged. I think the majority of them were never charged with any crimes. There are, however, some, and this is part of the psychological warfare game, there are some who were charged and who did kill Israelis. It is true. And they were released. Now, one question you should ask is, why did Israel choose to release prisoners who had known terrorist attacks that had killed Palestinians? Why would they choose to release some of these people? Now, there were other names on the list that the Palestinians wanted, and they were denied. And they were people that led movements like the First or Second Intifada. They're leaders in the Palestinian movement, and they were not allowed out. And they didn't bomb anybody, they didn't kill anybody, but they're still sitting in prison. And Israel said no to them. These are the ones that did not kill anybody. And instead, Israel allowed people that they had convicted with multiple life sentences, who had verifiably killed Israelis. They allowed them out of jail. Now ask yourself why that is. Well, it's so that they can point at that person rather than, the Israelis should just be mad at the Israeli government for letting them out. I mean, if somebody's been convicted of multiple life sentences, maybe that's not the person you allow out when you're doing the negotiation. You say, no, these people have been convicted of these crimes and we're not letting them out. Israel lets them out so that they can do this type of propaganda. They could see people, of course, greeting them with love, because that's what family members do. And then they say, see, they're being celebrated as a hero, as their mother or their wife or their children are hugging them, family members are hugging them. Any convicted killer, anybody who gets out of jail is going to have that sort of reception from their family. They're going to receive love, because families love all their family members, no matter what they do. And so they use this as a photo op and then say, see what we're dealing with, this is moral rot. Like, they love this person, they're embracing this person. And this person committed all these crimes and killed all these Israelis. Israel didn't have to let them go, but they chose to. They didn't allow others out. They chose these individuals so that they could, not this particular person that I just showed you, because that particular person is, not somebody who has verifiably committed any of these crimes. But nonetheless, this is a propaganda. This is the psychological warfare. It's to get you angry. It's so that they could point at this person and say, this person was a murderer that killed children. And now, that's to rile you up. That's to get you angry. That's so that they could say, see what kind of animals we're dealing with. Okay, well, what about all the IDF soldiers that killed many more than, they're trying to claim that this person here said that he killed seven Israeli children, is what they were trying to claim. There's many IDF soldiers who killed way more children than 7. That's for damn sure. You don't end up killing a population of 60, killing about 100,000 people. We're not even sure how many people were killed, but certainly more than the 60,000 they claim. more than half of them women and children. So, what do you say about those IDF soldiers? They go home and they get embraced by their family members. I guess they're treated as heroes too. Here's another, show you another example of the psychological warfare that's going on. This is from the Free Press. This is Bari Weiss's organization. She's now the editor-in-chief of CBS News. And they put out on Monday, just hours after the last living hostage was returned home, and as the ink was still drying on the peace deal with Israel, Hamas carried out mass public executions in Gaza City's main square in full view of the public. The terror group claimed the killings targeted criminals and collaborators with Israel. And here's the video. Okay, so sorry about that. I probably should have given you
on Monday, just hours after the last living hostage was returned home, and as the ink was still drying on a peace deal with Israel, Hamas carried out mass public executions in Gaza City's main square in full view of the public. The terror group claimed the killings targeted criminals and collaborators with Israel. Among those executed was Ahmad Zidan al-Tarabin, accused of recruiting agents for one of rival anti-Hamas militia groups that have grown in size and power in recent months. Under President Trump's peace plan, Hamas was not meant to govern Gaza or retain its weapons, yet the terror group has openly refused to disarm.
حركة حماس لن تسلم سلاحها، هذا أمر غير خاضع للتفاوض. قيادات حماس لن تخرج. قيادات حركة حماس شعارها إما أن ننتصر أو نستشهد.
In fact, Hamas's reprisals against rival clans began before the peace deal was even signed. On Sunday, reports from Gaza indicated that at least 25 members of the powerful Dagmush family were killed in clashes with Hamas's internal security forces. First-hand accounts described gunmen disguised as medics arriving in ambulances, then executing victims in front of their families. On Sunday, President Trump indicated he had authorized Hamas to temporarily handle internal security in Gaza as part of the deal to bring the remaining hostages home.
Because they do want to stop the problems, and they've been open about it, and we gave them approval for a period of time.
The return of those hostages and the immediate ceasefire mark a major breakthrough. But Hamas's refusal to disarm and the bloodshed that immediately followed the Israeli troop withdrawal signal that the path to true peace in Gaza remains long and far from certain.
It remains long and far from certain because the Israelis don't actually really want peace. So this is, yes, it is true that Hamas carried out executions in Gaza. That is true. That is happening. The big thing, I talked about this, 2 days ago on the show. Every country in existence has collaborators from the other side, from the locals. Every country that goes to war finds collaborators amongst the locals. When the war ends, those collaborators, especially if the group that hired them has to pull out of the territory, whether it be Vietnam or Afghanistan or Syria or anywhere, those people who worked with the enemy their lives are in danger. Now, most of the time, moral countries work to get those collaborators out. You have to get them out. You have to evacuate them. And a lot of times you're promising that to them. You're promising that you're going to get them out. That is why Afghanistan was so shameful, because Biden he left a lot of collaborators behind to be killed. And what happened? Shortly after, the Taliban went through and executed a bunch of collaborators. What happened in Syria? A lot of people who collaborated with Assad and Al-Qaeda went around and killed them. That's what happens. In Vietnam, after Vietnam, many collaborators were killed. That's what happens after every single war. And so this is not new. In fact, what did Jewish mobs do after World War II? They went around killing a bunch of capos. That's what they did. So this is what happens. And Israel openly bragged about arming Hamas, arming the rivals to Hamas and collaborating with them. They openly bragged about that during the war, and then they left them behind. Rather than evacuate them, they left them behind. I find that morally despicable. They're going to get executed. That's what happens after war. Jews did it to other Jews after World War II. They executed the collaborators. Mobs lynched collaborators. Jews did that to other Jews. That's not about, these animals, this is what we're dealing with. Okay, then I guess you're an animal too. If you're a Jew and you're calling the Palestinians animals because they're executing each other, for being collaborators, well, then guess what? I guess your people are animals too, because you did the same thing after World War II. Everybody does it. It doesn't make it right, but it's what happens. And you know it's going to happen, so that's why you try to get them out. You try to rescue them if your side has the ability to do that, and Israel certainly did. They just chose not to. Why? Well, because they're not Jews. They don't want to bring them back into the land of the Jews. They don't want them to become refugees there. That's because that's what they would be. They would be refugees, and they didn't want the refugees. So they left them there to die, and then they use it as propaganda. They use it to gaslight us all into thinking, oh, see these animals? See these animals? This is the problem. The New York Post is also in on this. We're just seeing this propaganda over and over and over again.
Infuriatingly, just hours after signing a peace treaty with Israel, Hamas turned their weapons inward, publicly executing Palestinian citizens that it says were, quote, criminals and collaborators with Israel. And just as I discussed on the podcast yesterday, this seems to confirm global concerns that the second phase of President Trump's peace plan, which includes disarming Hamas, is going to be even more difficult than negotiating the hostage return in phase one. And President Trump was, as you might imagine, not happy about the developments in Gaza.
And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently. But they will disarm. Do you understand me?
Yes. Now, he didn't elaborate on the how of that statement. The president also said that the terror group misrepresented how many dead hostages' bodies that they had in their possession after only 4 were handed over on Monday.
See, this is an attempt to get us all to go along with, well, can't make a deal. Got to just keep going to war. That's what this is. And it's coming from the Free Press, which is Bari Weiss's organization. And, you know, she's sitting there, I'm not Mossad. What is Mossad? What is Mossad? I'm so ignorant. I don't know anything about Mossad. But anyway, I'm going to be controlling CBS News. Then you got the New York Post, you got Bari Weiss, you got all these people online just pushing and pushing and pushing this narrative of Hamas are animals. Look at what they're not disarming, even though Trump said we allowed them to keep their arms in order to keep. You know, you got to police the enclave. You can't just get rid of all policing. They're using everything they possibly can from who Israel verified and allowed to be released as prisoners, from allowing Hamas to be armed, executions that they knew would absolutely happen of collaborators. They're using every ounce of this as propaganda to gaslight people and to going along with, see, we have no choice but to finish the job. And they're even getting Trump, because we just watched a bit of this clip from the New York Post, but let's just play this again. This is Donald Trump saying, if we have to disarm them, we will disarm them, and maybe even perhaps violently. What exactly does that mean?
We have told them we want to disarm, and they will disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently. But they will disarm. Do you understand me?
Yes. I understand you, Trump. That means going back to war. That means no more phase 2. That's exactly what that means when you say violently. So then we're just marching back into war. This is why the Free Palestine movement did not celebrate when the ceasefire agreement was signed, because nobody trusts Israel. Because this is what happens time and time again. This wasn't the first war that they waged against the Palestinians. This wasn't the first genocide they committed against them. And it won't be the last, because they're hell-bent on continuing this. In fact, here is Smotrich saying there will be Jewish settlements in Gaza. This was just the other day. We dubbed it in English for you so that you could understand it, but here it is.
Israel, there will be Jewish settlement in Gaza, and without settlement... First of all, in the way of Israel, it's ours. But naturally, we truly sat with security, so we have patience, but we have determination and faith, and we, with God's help, will continue the series of the victories and the great miracles throughout the war of the local representatives to be the only committee that maintained the God, with God's help, here in the land of Israel.
Okay, so they're not stopping. They're not wanting to stop. There's this is a large rally cry for we're going to be settling Gaza, and that's just the end of it. John Mersheimer appeared on Piers Morgan's show And he broke it down, saying, look, they're wanting the whole land. This is what he had to say.
I think you greatly underestimate, Piers, how deeply committed the Israelis are to ethnically cleansing both Gaza and the West Bank. The Israelis now have a situation where there are roughly as many Palestinians as there are Israeli Jews inside of Greater Israel. And this is an unacceptable situation for most Israelis. And they're completely committed to ethnically cleansing Gaza and then the West Bank. I think the evidence is overwhelming on this. Now, you say President Trump sees this as a great opportunity to prove that he's a statesman and he can bring peace to the Middle East. I think in principle that he'd love to do that. But I've written a book with Steve Walt on the Israel lobby, and there's absolutely no question in my mind that if President Trump gets rough with Prime Minister Netanyahu, Netanyahu will turn to the lobby, and the lobby will force Trump to back off. There's no way Trump is going to get tough with Netanyahu if he violates the ceasefire. Remember, he did that on March 18th.
But do you not think he's already got tough with him? Because I think the catalyst for what we've seen today and unfurled in the last few days, I think the catalyst was Israel's attack on the Hamas negotiating team in Doha, which was unbelievably ill-advised. It was a catastrophic failure. They didn't kill anyone from the Hamas negotiating team. They killed a Qatari security guy and other people unconnected with Hamas. And the opprobrium this brought on Israel from all the leading leaders of the Middle Eastern countries and states around there was tremendous. They all got on the phone to Trump. And then an extraordinary thing happened. Donald Trump made Netanyahu get on the phone and apologize to the Prime Minister of Qatar. I've never heard of anything quite like that happening. It was a public humiliation for Netanyahu. And it showed me that Trump does wield a lot of power. I mean, if Trump was to suddenly say, we are withdrawing all military support and financial support for Israel, then Israel could not be the superpower that it is in the Middle East.
Okay, so what if Trump humiliated Netanyahu? That's if you think Netanyahu's actually in charge. Netanyahu's not in charge. He's beholden to the extreme factions of Israel. That's what we've seen over and over again. And we actually know who's really in charge of U.S. foreign policy, the unelected female president of the United States you never voted for, Miriam Adelson. He made that really clear. The Adelsons visited the White House more than anybody else. He's sitting there saying, who do you love more? Do you love Israel or do you love the United States? She wouldn't answer. It's okay, as he laughs. Treason, total treason. A country that has been undermining the United States, a country that is looking to just support itself, and he is inviting these people into the White House, cheering them on, and doing everything that they want, which is not in the benefit of the United States of America. That is actually the definition of treason. But look, at the end of the day, Israel has no desire to really move on to phase two. Many of us do not believe we're going to hit phase two. We might get to the early stages of phase two, and then the Israelis will back out. At any moment, the Israelis can back out. And I think that's why we're not celebrating yet. That's why we're extremely skeptical. And that's why we're not going to hold our breath on this one. Really, until the Zionist movement is over, until this whole idea that the land is just for the Jews, unless that gets eradicated, this war will not end. And that is the unfortunate reality of it. Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iversen Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. It is free for you to watch. Again, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, KimIversonShow.com. See you there.